The orphan pulled a native girl from the river. The next day, 100 warriors gave him a family. 7-year-old Eli Thompson had been living alone for 2 years. 2 whole years. By a river that would just as soon kill you as feed you. Most folks would call that impossible. A child that small can't survive on his own, can't hunt, can't build a shelter, can't stay warm when the world turns to ice. But Eli did. He was proof that the impossible was just something that hadn't happened yet. And right now, the impossible was happening again. His small hands, usually steady when setting a snare or skinning a rabbit, were shaking. But he held on tight, pulling the 12-year-old girl from the churning, angry water. Her name was Ayana, though he didn't know it yet. All he knew was the dead weight of her body, limp and lifeless in his tiny arms. The river had grabbed her while she was filling clay pots. One slip, one moment of carelessness, and the current owned you. Eli had been just downstream, checking the fish traps he'd woven from reeds and vines, a skill he'd learned by watching a beaver build its dam. He'd heard a single, terrified scream, swallowed almost instantly by the roar of the water. He didn't think. He just moved. He dove in, the shock of the cold water stealing his breath. The current was a monster, pulling him under, tumbling him over rocks. But being small, being just a boy, it helped him. He was a sliver of life the river couldn't quite get a grip on. He moved through the water faster than a grown man could have, fighting his way to her. When he finally dragged her onto the muddy bank, she wasn't breathing. Her skin was a terrifying shade of blue. Her eyes were closed. Panic clawed at his throat, but he pushed it down. He'd seen something like this once. A man at the old trading post had fallen from a wagon. The doctor had done something. Eli squeezed his eyes shut, trying to remember. He put his hands on her chest, just like he'd seen. He pushed. Once. Twice. He leaned down, pinched her nose, and breathed air into her lungs, his own lungs burning from the effort. Nothing. He did it again. Pushed. Breathed. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Come on. Come on. Suddenly, her body convulsed. A violent cough racked her frame, and she spewed a lungful of river water onto the ground. She gasped, a ragged, desperate sound. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. She blinked up at him, her dark eyes wide with confusion, and then something else. Something that looked like she knew him. But that was impossible. He'd never seen her before in his life. "You're so small," she whispered, her voice a raw croak. Her hand, trembling, lifted toward his face. He flinched, but she was gentle, her fingers barely grazing his cheek. Her gaze drifted to his shoulder, where his worn shirt had torn. Her eyes locked onto the skin there. And her expression changed completely. The confusion was gone, replaced by a shocking certainty. "But you have the mark." Eli pulled back, a hot flush of shame rising in him. He hated when people saw the scars. 3 pale, thin lines on his shoulder. The woman at the trading post had called them ugly, damaged, the reason no one wanted him. "I should take you home," Eli mumbled, looking away. "Your family will be worried." But Ayana was already pushing herself up, wincing. She didn't seem to care about her family, or the fact she'd almost died. Her eyes were fixed on him, burning with an intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. "What is your name, little one?" "Eli. Eli Thompson." "Thompson," she repeated, the name sounding strange and foreign on her tongue. She shook her head slowly. "That is not your real name." Before he could even begin to process that, she was on her feet, water dripping from her beaded dress, forming a puddle at her feet. "You live alone here?" Eli just nodded, gesturing toward the small, crude shelter he'd built into the hillside, a miserable little thing of branches and mud. But it was his. For how long? 2 winters, Eli said, holding up 2 fingers, the way he did when counting rabbits. Since the post closed. A deep sadness filled her eyes. No child should live alone. It is not the way. Nobody cares for me, Eli said. It wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact, like the sun rising or the river flowing. I take care of myself. That will change tomorrow, Ayana said, and the certainty in her voice sent a shiver down his spine. My father will come at dawn. She paused, her eyes finding his again. He has been looking for you for a very, very long time. Looking for me? For one dizzying second, a wild, dangerous hope flared in his chest. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the familiar bitter taste of disappointment. Nobody looks for me. He was just a boy the world had forgotten. You're confused, he said flatly. But Ayana was already turning, walking toward the tree line where the forest grew thick and dark. She looked back over her shoulder one last time. Get some rest, little warrior, she called out. Tomorrow, your real life begins. Eli watched her disappear into the trees. He touched the 3 scars on his shoulder, the skin still tingling from her gaze. In the hollow part of his chest where feelings went to die, something began to stir. Something dangerous, something that felt an awful lot like hope. But hope was a trap for a boy who lived alone. Hope was the surest way to get your heart broken all over again. Eli woke when he heard the horses. At first, it was a vibration in the dirt, a low rumble he felt in his bones before he heard it with his ears. He thought he was dreaming. He'd learned to sleep lightly during his 2 years alone, his body tuned to the snap of a twig or the cry of a night bird. But this was different. This sounded like thunder rolling across the dry earth, shaking the very foundations of his small world. He crept to the opening of his shelter, a hole in the mud and branches just big enough for him to squeeze through, and peered into the morning mist. His blood ran cold. His small body froze solid with a fear so pure and absolute it stole the air from his lungs. They were everywhere. Men on horses, lining the ridge above his camp, their silhouettes massive and terrifying against the pale pre-dawn sky. There were dozens of them, more than he had ever seen in one place, more men than had ever been at the trading post, even on market day. And these weren't traders. Even from this distance, he could see the glint of weapons. He could see the stark patterns of war paint on their faces. They weren't just gathered, they were arranged, spaced with the chilling precision of warriors ready for battle. 100 warriors, all looking down at his camp. At him. Eli's 7-year-old mind spun, a whirlwind of panic. What had he done? Had he broken some rule he didn't know about by touching the girl? Was this her family? Were they here to punish him for saving her? It made no sense. He was just a boy, a little boy. Surely they wouldn't hurt him for helping someone. Or maybe that was the problem. Maybe he shouldn't have touched her. Maybe he had brought some shame to her family by pulling her from the water. His survival instinct screamed at him to run. He was already backing away from the opening, his bare feet silent on the cold ground, moving toward his escape route. A narrow channel through the tall reeds that led back to the river. He was small. He was fast. In the reeds, they would never find him. He could disappear. He knew how to disappear. He was just about to bolt when a voice spoke, calm and gentle, right behind him. Do not be afraid, little one. Eli spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. A man was standing there, not 10 feet from his shelter. A tall man with streaks of gray in his long black hair and eyes that were surprisingly kind. He hadn't heard him approach, not a single sound. The man had moved with the same impossible silence Eli used when he was hunting rabbits. But this man wasn't hunting. He was smiling, a small, sad smile. You are Eli, the man said. It wasn't a question. He knelt down, lowering his large frame slowly, carefully, until his eyes were level with Eli's. I am Chief Takakota. Ayana is my daughter. The words tumbled out of Eli in a panicked rush. I didn't hurt her. I swear, I saved her. The river took her and I pulled her out. I promise I didn't do anything bad. Takakota's gentle expression didn't waver. If anything, it grew softer. I know, child. That is exactly why we are here. He gestured with one hand toward the silent army on the ridge. They came to honor you, to thank the brave little warrior who saved one of our most precious children. Honor him? Eli's fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but now it was mixing with a profound confusion. They weren't here to hurt him. They were here to thank him. All of them, 100 warriors, for him. It was too much to understand. But I'm nobody. I'm not important. That, the chief said softly, is where you are wrong. He studied Eli's face, his gaze careful and intense, as if he were trying to memorize every feature. May I see your shoulder, little warrior? Eli hesitated. The scars. It was always the scars. They made adults uncomfortable. They made them look away. But there was something in Chief Takakota's voice, a deep well of sincerity, that made him feel safe. Slowly, he reached up and pulled the torn fabric of his shirt aside, revealing the 3 pale lines etched into his skin. Takakota's breath caught in his throat. A sharp, pained sound. He spoke rapidly in his own language to another man who had materialized at his side, a warrior with a weathered face and the same kind eyes as the chief. This is Koa, my brother, Takakota explained, his voice thick with emotion. He was there. He was there the night you received those marks. I don't remember, Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. The lady at the trading post said they were from an accident, when I was a baby. Koa knelt down beside his brother, his gaze fixed on Eli's shoulder. He spoke in slow, careful English, his voice a low rumble. Not accident, little one. Not accident. Those marks, they were made with love, by a man who wanted you to be his son, who wanted you to be part of our family. Family. The word echoed in the empty spaces of Eli's heart, the word he whispered to himself in the dark of night, the one thing he dreamed of more than food or warmth. My family? He whispered, the question hanging in the air like a prayer. We believe so, Takakota said, his voice gentle but heavy. Many years ago, 20 winters have passed. My youngest brother was hunting. It was a harsh winter, the snows were deep. And he found a small boy, barely more than a baby, left alone in the cold. The child was nearly dead from cold and hunger. You had no memory, no name, nothing. So my brother took you in. He began the rite of adoption, the ceremony to make you his own son. He gave you the mark of our family. Takakota touched his own shoulder, indicating a place beneath his shirt. But before the ceremony could be completed, his voice trailed off, filled with an old, deep pain. What happened? Eli asked, though a part of him was terrified to know the answer. You disappeared, Takakota said, his eyes dark with the memory. Taken. Stolen in the night by men who steal children. Men who sell them to the settlements far away, where no one knows their story. His voice grew heavy, each word weighted with 2 decades of grief. My brother. He spent the rest of his life searching for you. Every season he would ride out, following every rumor, every whisper. He never gave up. Tears pricked at Eli's eyes. Someone had searched for him. Someone had wanted him. He wasn't forgotten after all. A man he couldn't remember had spent his whole life looking for him. Is he here? Eli asked, a fragile hope rising in his chest. Can I meet him? Takakota's kind face filled with sorrow. He joined the ancestors 3 winters ago, little one. He died still looking for you. But he never, not for a single day, stopped believing you would find your way home. The hope in Eli's chest shattered, replaced by an ache so profound it felt like a physical wound. He was too late. He had a father, a real father who had wanted him, and he was gone forever. As Eli tried to process this overwhelming wave of discovery and loss, Takakota reached into a leather bag at his side and pulled out something small and made of wood. It was a horse, carved with incredible detail. Its lines were smooth and flowing, worn down by the touch of small hands. "This was yours," Takakota said, placing the wooden horse into Eli's palm. It felt warm, familiar. "My brother carved it for you just days before you were taken." Eli stared at the small toy. He ran his thumb over the smooth curve of its back, and deep inside his mind, in a place locked away for years, something stirred. Not a memory, not a clear picture, but a feeling, a powerful, undeniable feeling of warmth, of safety, of being held in strong arms and hearing a low, gentle voice humming a song. It was a ghost of a feeling, but it was real. He recognized it. He looked from the horse in his hand to the chief's sorrowful face, and then up to the 100 silent warriors on the ridge. His world had been turned completely upside down in the span of a few minutes. What happens now?" he asked, his voice small. A warm smile touched Takakota's lips, chasing away some of the sadness in his eyes. "Now," he said, "you choose. It is your choice, and yours alone. You can stay here by the river, living the life you have made for yourself. Or you can come home with us. Come home, and let us be the family you were meant to have. Let us love you the way a child deserves to be loved." Eli looked up at the 100 warriors. He didn't see frightening strangers anymore. He saw protectors. He saw men who had ridden here to honor him, to welcome him. He saw 100 faces that were all, somehow, his family. And for the first time in 2 long, lonely years, Eli felt like maybe, just maybe, he might finally belong somewhere. Eli clutched the wooden horse, its smooth surface a small point of certainty in a world that had suddenly become vast and confusing. The choice should have been easy, but it felt impossible for a 7-year-old mind to grasp. Stay here, in the life he knew, the one he had built with his own 2 hands. It was a hard life, a lonely one, but it was his. He understood its rules. He knew how to survive. Or go with these strangers, these men who spoke of a family he couldn't remember and a father he would never meet. It was a promise of everything he had ever wanted, but it was also a leap into a world he didn't understand at all. Trust was a luxury he hadn't been able to afford for a very long time. Can I bring my things?" he asked quietly, his gaze shifting toward his tiny, mud-caked shelter. A broad, warm smile spread across Chief Takakota's face. "Of course, little one. What is yours will always be yours." Eli didn't have much. He ran to his shelter and gathered his few precious possessions. A fishing line he'd painstakingly braided from twisted plant fibers. A sharp piece of flint he used for cutting and skinning. A small cup he'd carved from a piece of driftwood, lopsided and rough, but functional. And a tattered, threadbare blanket, the last remnant of his time at the trading post. Everything he owned in the entire world fit into the crook of his small arms. When he returned, Koa, the chief's brother, was kneeling by the riverbank, examining one of his fish traps with a look of genuine admiration. "You built these yourself?" the warrior asked, his weathered face crinkling with respect. Eli nodded shyly. "The river has fish," he explained, "but they're smart. You have to trick them." "Very clever," Koa said, and he meant it. "These are well made. The knots are strong. You will teach our own children how to build them." The idea of teaching someone, of having a skill that other people wanted to learn, made Eli's chest swell with a strange, warm feeling. For 2 years, he had only learned. Now, someone wanted to learn from him. It was a powerful thought. Just then, Ayana appeared at the edge of the clearing. She was leading a gentle mare with large, kind eyes. The girl had changed into dry clothes and her long hair was freshly braided. "This is Nayeli," she said, her voice soft as she approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "She is very patient with new riders, especially children." Eli had never been on a horse before. From his perspective, Nayeli looked as big as a mountain, but when Ayana held out her hand, he took it, and she helped him climb onto the mare's broad, warm back. Nayeli stood perfectly still, her ears twitching slightly, as if she understood she was carrying something precious and fragile. "I'll ride with you," Ayana said, swinging up gracefully and settling in behind him on the saddle. Her presence was a comforting warmth at his back. "In case you get scared." As they began the long journey, leaving his small, lonely camp behind forever, Eli felt completely overwhelmed. The 100 warriors formed a moving circle around them, a protective bubble of horses and men. It wasn't frightening anymore. It was the opposite. It felt like they were guarding something incredibly valuable. And he realized, with a jolt, that the valuable thing was him. "Why are there so many?" he asked Diana, his voice a whisper against the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves. "Because you are important," she replied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. When something precious that was lost is finally found, everyone wants to be there to celebrate. The landscape began to change as they rode higher into the foothills. Eli had never ventured more than a mile or two from his river camp, and every new sight was a kind of magic to his 7-year-old eyes. They rode through forests of towering trees that blocked out the sun, their leaves forming a canopy high above. They crossed streams that sparkled in the sunlight like the trading post woman's forgotten jewelry. He saw birds with feathers of brilliant blue and fiery red, colors he'd never even imagined. But as the day wore on and the initial wonder began to fade, a familiar coldness started to creep back into his small heart. Doubt. These people were kind. They called him family. But what if it was all a mistake? What if he got to their home and they changed their minds? What if he wasn't the boy they thought he was? He was a wild thing, a boy who had lived alone. He didn't know their ways, their rules. What if he did something wrong and they sent him away? Back to the river. Back to being alone. The thought was more terrifying than the 100 warriors had been at dawn. "What if I'm not good enough?" he whispered, so quietly he thought only the wind would hear. But Ayana heard. Her arms tightened around his small frame, a protective, reassuring hug. "Good enough for what, little brother?" "To be part of your family," he mumbled, his face hot with shame. "What if I don't know how to be a son?" "Oh, Eli," Ayana said, her voice gentle and close to his ear. "Being a son isn't something you have to learn how to do. It's not a skill like building a fish trap. It's something you already are." As the sun began to dip below the mountains, they made camp for the night. Eli watched in awe as the warriors moved with practiced efficiency, preparing food, tending to their horses, and setting up a secure perimeter. They included him in everything. They asked his opinion on where to build the fire to best catch the breeze. They shared their food with him, offering him the best pieces of roasted meat. They told him stories of the places they'd been, of great hunts and powerful spirits. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Eli fell asleep feeling completely, utterly safe. Not just safe from predators or the cold, but safe from the crushing weight of loneliness. Safe from the terrible, hollowing feeling of being unwanted. Tomorrow, he would see his new home. Tonight, he would dream of what it felt like to finally belong somewhere. But as sleep pulled him under, one small, persistent worry remained lodged in the back of his mind. What if the other children, the ones who had grown up in this family, didn't want him? What if they thought a strange little boy who'd lived alone by the river was too different, too wild, to ever truly fit in? The wooden horse in his hand seemed to whisper that everything would be all right. But even at 7 years old, Eli knew that wanting something to be true didn't always make it so. When they crested the final hill, Eli gasped. He pulled back on Naeli's reins without thinking, his eyes wide with disbelief. The tribal settlement spread out in the valley below them was like nothing he had ever imagined in his wildest dreams. It wasn't a camp, it was a town. Dozens of sturdy, well-built lodges were arranged in careful, concentric circles. Smoke curled lazily from cooking fires, carrying the scent of wood and roasting meat on the breeze. There were large, fenced gardens full of corn and squash, and a huge corral held more horses than he could possibly count. But what truly stunned him, what made his breath catch in his chest, were the people. So many people. All living together, moving and talking and working as one. Children, their laughter echoing through the valley, ran between the lodges, playing games with balls of woven grass and chasing after dogs. Women worked together in small groups, grinding corn and preparing food, their voices a low, happy murmur. Men tended to tools and weapons, their conversations punctuated by easy laughter. It was a symphony of community. It was everything his lonely heart had cried out for during those long, cold nights by the river. "It's so big," he whispered to Ayana, his voice full of awe. "Wait until you see the inside of your home," she replied, her own voice filled with pride. As their party of warriors descended the trail into the valley, people began to emerge from their homes. Word of their arrival had clearly traveled ahead of them, and soon a crowd was gathering in the central plaza. Eli instinctively tensed, expecting the curious, pitying stares he used to get at the trading post. The stares that labeled him as the orphan, the unwanted one. But as he looked at the faces in the crowd, he saw something entirely different. There was no pity. There was joy. There was relief. There was welcome. An elderly woman with hair as white as snow and a face mapped with 1,000 gentle wrinkles pushed her way through the crowd. She moved with a determined shuffle, her eyes fixed on Eli. As Ayana helped him down from Naeli's back, the old woman reached them and began speaking rapidly to Chief Takakota in their own language, gesturing toward Eli with hands that trembled with excitement. "She says you look just like your father did when he was a child," Takakota translated, kneeling beside Eli so he wouldn't be so intimidated. "She was there when my brother first brought you here, all those years ago. She remembers me?" Eli asked in wonder. The old woman understood his question without needing a translation. She nodded vigorously, her eyes shining, and spoke again. This time, her words brought tears to Chief Takakota's eyes. "She says," the chief's voice was thick with emotion, "she says she never stopped believing you would come home. She says she kept a place set for you at her table, at every single meal, for 20 years. The idea was so immense, so staggering, that Eli couldn't wrap his mind around it. For all those years he had felt invisible. For all that time he had believed no one in the world was thinking of him. This woman had been saving him a place. The thought made his chest feel tight with emotions he had no names for. But before he could even try to respond, 3 children broke away from the crowd. 2 boys who looked to be around 10 and 12, and a little girl who seemed to be about his own age. The youngest boy, a miniature version of the chief, stepped forward first. His dark eyes were curious, but his smile was open and friendly. "Are you really the lost one?" he asked in careful, practiced English. Eli nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. "I'm Takakota," the boy said proudly. "I am named for our chief. This is my brother, Koa, and this is our sister, Ayana." Eli looked from the boy to the girl, confused. "But there's already an Ayana." The little girl giggled, a bright, happy sound. "Names can be shared," she explained. "It means we are all part of the same family." "We've been waiting to meet you forever," the older boy, Koa, added. "Our grandfather, your father, he told us stories about you. About the little boy who was taken. He said you were very brave, even when you were just a baby." I don't feel very brave, Eli admitted, his voice barely a whisper. That's what makes you brave, little Ayanna said with the profound seriousness only a 7-year-old can manage. Being scared, but doing the right thing anyway. As the crowd began to disperse, letting them breathe, Chief Takakota placed a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder. Are you ready to see your new home? Eli nodded, though his stomach was fluttering with 1,000 butterflies. The chief led him toward a large, comfortable-looking lodge near the center of the settlement. Inside, it was warm and welcoming. Soft furs covered the floor, and beautiful woven blankets decorated the walls. But what caught Eli's attention, what made his heart stop, was a small bed in the corner. It was a real bed, with a wooden frame and a mattress stuffed with soft grass, clearly built for a child. His size. We prepared this for you, Takakota explained, his voice soft. Just in case you decided to stay. You built me a bed? Eli asked, his voice cracking with wonder. We built you a whole room, Koa said warmly from the doorway. A place that will always be yours, no matter what. That evening, as the settlement settled into its quiet, nighttime rhythms, Eli sat on the steps outside his new home, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. The sounds were so different from his river camp. There was no lonely cry of the owl, no constant rush of the water. Instead, he heard the distant laughter of children, the low murmur of adult conversations, the comfortable, peaceful noise of a community at rest. Little Ayanna appeared beside him, carrying a clay bowl that steamed in the cool air. Are you sad? She asked, settling down next to him. Not sad, Eli said thoughtfully. Just different. I've never been around so many people before. It will take time, she said, with a wisdom far beyond her years. She offered him the bowl. It was a stew, rich with meat and vegetables, and it smelled better than anything he had ever tasted. Eating will help, and learning. We will help you learn. That's what families do. As Eli ate the warm stew, the best meal of his entire life, and listened to the gentle sounds of his new home, he felt something solid and real growing in his chest. It wasn't quite happiness yet, but it was close. It was hope. Real, solid hope. But even as a blanket of comfort and belonging settled around him, one nagging question remained in his young mind. He had been welcomed. He had been given a home. But would he ever truly be one of them? Would he be able to become the person these kind, wonderful people believed him to be? Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new chances to prove that he belonged. For now, it was enough. It was more than enough to know that someone had built him a bed and saved him a place at their table for 20 long years. He was finally, impossibly, home. Eli's first week in the settlement was a whirlwind of new experiences, a flood of wonders he'd never imagined. Every morning, a small group of children would appear at the door of his lodge, their faces bright and eager, ready to pull him into their world. They taught him how to weave tall grasses into strong rope. They showed him which plants were good for medicine and which ones were good for dye. They patiently taught him the simple words of their language. Hello, thank you, brother. But the week also brought challenges, moments that made his small heart ache with a familiar cold worry. The trouble started on his 4th day. The children were playing a game that involved throwing small, flat stones at a target drawn in the dirt. When his turn came, Eli took a stone, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. For 2 years, hitting a moving target with a stone meant the difference between eating and going hungry. He had learned to throw with deadly accuracy, his life depending on it. He squinted, aimed, and threw. The stone flew straight and true, smacking the exact center of the target with a satisfying thwack. The other children cheered. Do it again, little Takakota urged, his voice filled with admiration. So Eli did. He hit the center again, and again. On his 5th throw, he didn't even aim for the center. He aimed for the stone already embedded there, chipping it with his new throw. Everyone went quiet. "How did you learn to do that?" young Takakota asked, his awe turning into puzzlement. "I had to eat," Eli said simply, not understanding the sudden shift in mood. An older boy named Nikon, whose face always seemed to be set in a permanent scowl, stepped forward. "Show off," he muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not showing off," Eli protested, his cheeks growing warm. "You asked me to play." "Nobody's that good at throwing stones," Nikon said, his voice getting louder, more accusatory. "You're just trying to make us all look stupid." Little Ayana moved to stand protectively next to Eli. "He's not trying to make anyone look stupid, Nikon. He's just good at it." "Yeah, because he's weird," Nikon shot back, his words sharp as broken glass. "What kind of 7-year-old lives alone in the woods for 2 years? That's not normal. Normal children can't do that." The words hit Eli like stones themselves. This was exactly what he had feared, that they would see him as a freak, that his past, the very thing that had allowed him to survive, would now make it impossible for him to belong. "I'm not weird," Eli said quietly, but his voice shook with a hurt so deep it felt like a physical pain. "No?" Nikon challenged, stepping closer. "Then why don't you know how to play any normal games? Why do you jump every time someone makes a loud noise?" "Why?" he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "Do you hoard food in your pockets like a squirrel? Like an animal?" Eli's face burned with shame. He had been doing that. Without even thinking, he had been tucking away pieces of bread or dried meat from his meals, stuffing them into his pockets. It was a deeply ingrained habit from 2 years of never knowing where his next meal would come from. He thought no one had noticed. He felt like a wild creature caught in a trap. "That's enough, Nikon," young Takakota said firmly, stepping between them. But the damage was done. Eli turned and ran. He fled the game, the accusing stares, and the laughter he imagined was following him. Tears streamed down his face, hot and furious. He found a quiet, hidden spot behind the horse corrals and curled himself into a tight ball against a fence post, trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible. Maybe Nikon was right. Maybe he was too different, too damaged from his time alone to ever fit in with normal children. Maybe wanting a family wasn't enough if you didn't know how to be a part of one. He was still crying, his small body shaking with silent sobs, when he sensed someone approaching. He looked up to see the old grandmother, the elder Ayana, the one who had kept a place for him. She lowered herself carefully onto the ground beside him, her joints creaking in protest. She didn't say anything at first, just sat with him in the quiet comfort of her presence. "Little one," she said finally, her voice warm and kind, her English broken but full of compassion. "Why you hide tears?" "I don't belong here," Eli whispered, the words choked with misery. "I'm too different. I don't know how to be like the other children." Grandmother Ayana was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes watching the horses in the corral. Then she spoke, not in English, but in her own language, in words that were slow and melodic. Eli was just beginning to understand them. "She says," a new voice translated from behind them, "that a horse raised by wolves would be different from the horses raised in the herd, but it would still be a horse. And it might know things about the world that the other horses need to learn." Eli turned to see the elder Ayana, his new sister, approaching. She wasn't alone. Behind her were several other children, including little Takakota and young Ayana. Nikon was not with them. "We came to say we are sorry for Nikon," little Takakota said, his face serious. "He is angry. His father was part of a search party for you many years ago. He was hurt, a bad fall from his horse. He has walked with a limp ever since. Nikon blames you, but that does not make it right for him to hurt you." "We don't think you're weird," young Ayana added, stepping forward. "We think you're amazing. You can do things we can't do. You survived." Then little Takakota asked the question that changed everything. "Will you teach us?" he asked, his eyes wide with genuine hope. "Will you teach us how to do it? How to make those fish traps? How to track animals? How to be brave when you're scared?" Eli wiped the tears from his eyes with the back of his sleeve. He looked from one eager face to the next. They weren't making fun of him. They weren't disgusted by him. They were impressed. They wanted to learn from him. You really want to learn?" "Of course we do," the elder Ayana said with a warm smile. "You're our brother now. Brothers teach each other things." As the children settled in a circle around him, peppering him with excited questions about his life by the river, about how to read the clouds and find north using the stars, Eli felt a new kind of warmth bloom in his chest. Maybe being different didn't mean he didn't belong. Maybe it just meant he had different things to offer. But even as he began to feel a glimmer of hope, he couldn't help but wonder. Would there always be people like Nikon, people who saw his differences as flaws? And would he ever be strong enough to prove them wrong? The opportunity to prove himself came sooner and more dramatically than Eli could have ever expected. On his 10th day in the settlement, he was woken just after dawn by a frantic pounding on the door of his lodge. Little Ayana burst in, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Eli, you have to help!" she cried, her voice shaking with panic. "It's Takakota, my cousin and 2 other boys, Nico and Sani. They went exploring in the canyon yesterday, and they never came back." Eli was instantly awake, sitting bolt upright in his bed. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "How long have they been gone?" "Since yesterday morning," she sobbed. "They said they were just going to the edge to look for eagle feathers. The adults have been searching all night, the whole night, but the canyon is huge, and there are so many caves, so many places to hide. They're afraid the boys are hurt, or worse." Eli's mind snapped into the survival mode that had been his constant companion for 2 years. Lost children, dangerous terrain, limited time, bad weather moving in from the mountains. He had been in situations just like this before, though always as the one who was lost, never as the one who might be able to find someone. "I can help," he said, his voice steady. He was already jumping out of bed, reaching for his clothes. "I can help find them." Little Ayana stared at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Really? But you're just 7. The grown-ups, all the best warriors and trackers, they couldn't find them all night." "That's why I might be able to," Eli explained, his voice calm and certain as he pulled on his boots. "I don't think like an adult tracker. I think like a scared child." He met her gaze, his own eyes serious. "When you're lost and you're frightened, you don't do what adults expect you to do. You don't leave a trail." They ran through the waking settlement, past the worried faces of the adults, to the central plaza where Chief Takakota and a dozen other warriors were preparing to set out for another search. Their faces were grim, etched with exhaustion and fear. Eli approached the chief, his small stature swallowed by the group of tall men. But his voice, when he spoke, was clear and determined. "I want to help look for the boys." Chief Takakota looked down at him, his eyes weary and clouded with worry. "Little one, this is not a game. We have been searching since last dark. The canyon is a dangerous place, and you are still learning our lands. It is better for you to stay here, where it is safe." "But I know about being lost," Eli insisted, stepping forward so the chief had to look at him. "When I lived alone, I got lost many times. I know what it feels like. I know where scared children hide." Koa, who was checking the straps on his saddle, paused and knelt beside Eli. He saw the seriousness in the boy's eyes. "What would you do differently, little warrior? We have checked every cave and every ravine on the canyon floor." Eli closed his eyes for a second, forcing himself back into the terror he'd felt so many times. The feeling of the world being too big, of being a small, helpless thing in a dangerous wilderness. "Adults look for signs on the ground," he said, opening his eyes. "You look for footprints, for broken branches, but when you're really, really scared, you don't think about leaving tracks. You only think about one thing. You just want to feel safe." "So where does a child go to feel safe?" Koa asked, genuinely curious now. The other warriors had stopped their preparations and were listening. "Up," Eli said immediately, without a shred of doubt. "Not down. Never down into dark caves or shadowy ravines. That's where the predators live. You go up, where you can see everything coming, where nothing can sneak up on you from behind. You find high rocks, or tall trees, or a ledge, anywhere that feels protected, but gives you a view of the world." Chief Takakota exchanged a long, meaningful glance with the other men. The boy had a point. Their entire search had been focused on the canyon floor and the network of caves at its base. And, Eli continued, his confidence growing as he saw they were listening, they would stay together. Adults might split up to cover more ground, but scared children stick together. Always, no matter what. Within minutes, the plan had changed completely. Eli found himself riding double with Koa, heading back toward the canyon, a part of the official search party. But this time, they weren't looking down. They were all looking up. As they reached the rocky, treacherous terrain of the canyon mouth, Eli scanned the towering walls of rock, his eyes trained by years of necessity to spot shelter, danger, and safety. He ignored the obvious caves and overhangs near the bottom. He looked higher. "There," he said suddenly, his small arm shooting out to point at a sheer cliff face hundreds of feet above them. "That ledge. See it? Halfway up. That narrow shelf of rock. It's protected from the wind by that outcrop. There's water seeping from the stone right there, and from that spot, you could see the whole valley." "I can't see anything up there, Eli," Koa said, squinting into the morning glare. "There," Eli insisted, pointing more precisely. "Behind that big boulder, a flash of blue, the color of Sani's shirt." One of the warriors beside them let out a powerful call, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. And then they heard it, a faint, weak cry answering from high above. The three missing boys huddled together on the ledge, dirty, cold, and terrified, but completely unharmed. They had climbed up when they realized they were lost, found the tiny protected shelter, and then had been too scared to attempt the treacherous climb back down. As the rescue party used ropes and gentle encouragement to carefully bring the boys down to safety, Chief Takakota walked over to Eli and placed a heavy, grateful hand on his shoulder. "Without you, we might have searched for days in all the wrong places," he said, his voice thick with respect and relief. "You did not think like a warrior. You thought like a child, and because of that, you saved them." When they returned to the settlement with the three found boys, word of Eli's role in the rescue had already spread like wildfire. The entire village came out to greet them, their cheers echoing through the valley. Even Nikon pushed his way through the crowd, his face a mixture of relief for his friends and shame for his own earlier cruelty. "I was wrong about you," the older boy said quietly, not quite meeting Eli's eyes. "You're not weird. You're special. In a good way." That evening, as Eli sat with his new family, sharing their evening meal, he felt a new emotion settling deep in his bones. It wasn't just the feeling of belonging. It was the knowledge that he had something valuable, something unique to offer this family. His differences, the things Nikon had called weird, weren't flaws to be hidden away in shame. They were strengths. They were gifts that could help others. But even as the warmth of acceptance and the pride of his accomplishment surrounded him, Eli sensed that his journey wasn't over. Growing up meant more than just finding the place where you belong. It meant proving, again and again, that you deserved to stay there. 3 weeks had passed since Eli's arrival. 3 weeks that felt longer and more full than the 2 years he had spent alone by the river. Life in the settlement had settled into a comfortable rhythm. He woke each morning to the sound of children playing, not the lonely cry of a hawk. He ate 3 meals a day, surrounded by the warm chatter of people who cared about him. He fell asleep each night in his own bed, in his own room, knowing with absolute certainty that he was safe and wanted. But on this particular morning, the rhythm was different. Chief Takakota approached him as he sat by the morning fire, his expression unusually serious. "Little one, I need to speak with you about something important," Takakota said, settling his large frame on the log beside Eli. "In our tribe, when someone joins our family, especially when they join our family for the second time, there is a ceremony, a way of making the bond official, permanent." Eli's heart gave a sudden, excited leap, which was immediately followed by a nervous flutter. "A ceremony? For me?" "Yes, but before we can hold it, I must be certain, absolutely certain, that this is what you want. Once you officially become my adopted son, my son in name and spirit and law, there is no going back. You will belong to us, completely, and we, all of us, will belong to you." The words should have filled Eli with pure, uncomplicated joy. It was everything he had ever dreamed of: a father, a family, permanence. But instead of joy, the chief's solemn words stirred up a thick sludge of fear and doubt he thought he had left behind at the river. "What if I disappoint you? What if, after all this, I'm still not good enough to be your real son?" Takakota's expression grew tender, as if he could read the fear in Eli's young mind. "What makes you think you might not be good enough?" Eli stared down at his own small hands, unable to meet the chief's kind gaze. "I lived like an animal for 2 years," he mumbled, the words tasting like shame in his mouth. "I don't know how to be civilized, like the other children. Sometimes I still wake up at night and for a second, I think I'm back at the river. I think I'm still alone." "And what do you think?" the chief asked gently, "when you realize you are here, with us, in your own bed?" "I feel grateful," Eli admitted, "but also scared. Scared that it's too good to be true. Scared that one day I'll wake up and it will all be gone." Takakota was quiet for a long moment. He didn't speak, just watched the morning life of the settlement unfold around them. Children were laughing as they chased a dog around the central fire. Women worked together, their hands moving skillfully as they prepared the day's food. Men shared stories as they sharpened tools. "Eli," Takakota said finally, his voice a low, steady rumble, "do you see Koa's son over there, playing with the others?" Eli nodded, watching a boy about his own age throwing a ball made of woven grass. "He was born here," Takakota continued. "He was raised with every comfort, every advantage. He has never known a day of hunger or a night of fear. Yet yesterday, when those 3 children were lost in the canyon, he froze. He was overcome with fear for his friends, and he could not think what to do." Takakota placed a gentle, firm hand on Eli's shoulder, turning the boy to face him. "But you," he said, his eyes locking with Eli's, "a 7-year-old boy who lived alone in the wilderness, who has known more hardship than any man here. You were the one who saved them. You saved them with your courage and your wisdom." "But I still don't know all your customs," Eli protested, the doubts still swirling. "I still make mistakes with your language. "You still have the heart of a protector," Takakota interrupted gently but firmly. "You still put the safety of others before your own. You still show kindness to those who have been unkind to you. These, Eli, are the qualities that make a good son, a good man, not perfect manners or flawless speech." That afternoon, Eli found himself walking alone to the edge of the settlement, to the very spot where he had first looked down upon the valley. He stood there for a long time, looking back toward the distant mountains, where his old life, his old shelter, lay hidden and silent. A part of him, a small, scared part, wondered what would happen if he just kept walking? If he simply walked away from it all and went back to the river? Would they chase after him? Would they let him go? Would he even survive another winter alone? As he stood there, wrestling with his fears, little Ayana appeared silently at his side. "Are you leaving?" she asked quietly, her small hand slipping into his. "I don't know," Eli admitted honestly. "I'm scared of the ceremony." "Why?" "What if I make a promise to be your brother and then I fail? What if I mess it up?" "You can't mess it up," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You already are my brother. The ceremony doesn't make you family. It just tells everyone else what is already true in our hearts." "But what if I'm not brave enough, or smart enough? What if—" "What if?" she interrupted, her 7-year-old voice filled with a surprising wisdom. "Eli, you saved my sister from drowning when you were half her size. You found the lost boys when all the grown-up warriors couldn't. You made friends with children who were scared of you at first. If that's not brave enough and smart enough, then I don't know what is." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, Eli made his choice. He didn't make it because he felt perfectly ready or completely worthy. He made it because he had learned something profoundly important during his weeks with the tribe. Family wasn't about being perfect. It was about choosing to belong to each other, flaws and all. It was a promise you make every single day. That evening, he found Chief Takakota sitting by the main fire. He walked up to the man who had offered him a world he never thought possible and looked up into his kind, patient eyes. "I want the ceremony," Eli said, his voice quiet but filled with a new, hard-won determination. "I want to be your son, really and truly." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Takakota's face, and Eli saw tears of pure joy gathering in the corners of the chief's eyes. "Then tomorrow, little warrior," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "tomorrow you will officially become what you have always been in our hearts. Family." The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, the sky a flawless, brilliant blue. Eli woke to find a set of new clothes laid out for him at the foot of his bed. There was a beautiful shirt made of soft, tan deerskin, decorated with intricate patterns of blue and white beadwork, and a pair of soft leather pants that fit him perfectly. As he dressed, his hands only shook a little. The entire settlement had gathered in the central plaza around a large, carefully built fire that crackled and sent sparks dancing toward the morning sky. Eli had never seen so many people in one place, and the realization that they were all here for him was both overwhelming and wonderful. Chief Takakota appeared at the entrance to his lodge. He was wearing his finest ceremonial clothing, adorned with eagle feathers and elaborate quill work. "Are you ready, my son?" he asked, and the way he said the word son with such pride and love made Eli's heart flutter with a joy so pure it almost hurt. "Yes, father," Eli replied, and the word felt right. It felt like coming home. As they walked together toward the gathering, Eli noticed that every person they passed smiled at him with genuine warmth. The children he had befriended waved excitedly. The adults who had watched him over the past weeks, who had seen him find the lost boys, nodded with solemn approval. Even Nikon, the boy who had once called him weird, was there, and he gave Eli a small, encouraging nod. The ceremony itself was simpler and more beautiful than Eli could have imagined. The tribe's elders spoke in their ancient, melodic language about the importance of family, of belonging, of the sacred bonds that hold a community together. Then Chief Takakota stood before the whole tribe, placed his hands on Eli's small shoulders, and spoke in words that needed no translation. They were words of love, of protection, of a permanent, unbreakable bond. When Grandmother Ayana stepped forward holding a small clay bowl, Eli braced himself for something mysterious or painful. Instead, she simply dipped her finger into what looked like simple, wet clay from the riverbank and gently painted a small circular symbol on his forehead. "This is the mark of our family," Takakota explained softly, his hand resting on Eli's back. "It will wash away with the rain, but what it represents, that you are one of us, now and forever, will last for all your days." But the most meaningful moment came at the end. One by one, each child in the tribe, from the smallest toddlers to the teenagers, came forward to welcome him officially as their brother. Little Ayana hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe and whispered in his ear, "Now it's official. You're stuck with us forever." Little Takakota grinned and asked, "Can you teach us more survival tricks now that you're really our brother?" The older children, who had once been wary of the strange boy from the river, now accepted him completely. They had seen his courage, his kindness, and his willingness to help. They knew he belonged. As the ceremony concluded, a great feast began, and Eli found himself sitting on a warm blanket between his new father, Chief Takakota, and his new grandmother, the elder Ayana. He was surrounded by more family than he had ever dared to dream possible. "Are you happy, little one?" Grandmother Ayana asked, offering him a piece of sweet honey cake. Eli looked around at all the faces smiling at him, his father, his sisters, his brothers, his vast new family of aunts, uncles, and cousins who would love him and protect him for the rest of his life. "I'm more than happy," he said, and his 7-year-old voice was strong and certain, without a trace of doubt. "I'm home." 6 months later, Eli could speak the tribal language almost fluently. He had taught nearly every child in the settlement how to build his clever fish traps. He had grown 2 inches taller from eating regular, nutritious meals, and the hollows in his cheeks had filled out. But the most important change couldn't be measured in inches or words learned. The frightened, haunted, lonely boy who had lived by the river was gone forever. In his place was a confident, happy, loved child who knew exactly where he belonged and exactly who he was. Eli, son of Chief Takakota, brother to many, protector of those in need, and a valued, cherished member of a family that would never, ever let him face the world alone again. When visiting traders would sometimes ask about the small boy with the serious eyes who seemed to hold such an important place in the tribe, the people would smile and tell them the simple truth. "That is our son," they would say with pride. "He was lost, and now he is found. He saved one of our children from the river, and in return, we all became his family." Eli's old, crude shelter by the river had long since been washed away by the rains and reclaimed by the wilderness. But it didn't matter. He had found something infinitely stronger, infinitely warmer, and infinitely better than survival. He had found love. He had found purpose. And he had found a home where his differences were not just accepted, but celebrated. The lost child had finally come home, and he would never be lost again. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable story where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.